Right, on to this now. DA MP Kevin Mileham says the party's proposed fuel price deregulation bill would reduce the price of fuel by about 9 rands a litre. The official opposition says this will take the fuel price to 17 rand 50 cents a litre and end the unnecessary taxes on fuel. Here to speak to us more on this, we're joined by Kevin Mileham, DA spokesperson for Mineral Resources and Energy. We've got the Fuel Retailers Association of South Africa CEO Reggie Sibiya, as well as Automobile Association spokesperson Layton. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Let's get straight to it. I mean, the DA proposal, in simple terms, it's scrapping the fuel levy, amending the road accident fund, and the fuel deregulation bill. In a sense, as we zoom in on that last point, you're saying this will allow, for example, for the import of cheap fuel, will allow for wholesalers to distribute cheaper fuel, and retailers will be able to compete based on price. And that certainly will be the way in which we can bring down the fuel price. Let me start with you, Babu Sibiya. You have called this call ignorant. You say those who think that they can call for deregulation are ignorant. They think that the margin for retailers is a lot to share. In fact, there is nothing to share. Actually, we need more in order to sustain our business. Is a call for deregulation anti-transformation and anti-job creation, Babu Sibiya?
Thank you, Thabo. I think you've summarized it very well. And as a start-off point, Thabo, is that, if we look at the coming fuel price, if I may just quickly, we're looking at a decrease, probably 150 or more on reduction on price. And the driver for that is the global sentiments and the fears around global recession and obviously the low consumption of fuel globally. So, and this trend is actually estimated to continue throughout the rest of this year. So probably by December of this year, we would have reached the 9 rand per litre reduction on fuel without anybody's intervention. And the point in case is that 60% of what drives the prices up and down has got nothing to do with local content. And I think I need to emphasize that. Coming to your question, if we look at markets that have deregulated a long time ago, I'm talking here like markets like Germany, markets like US, markets like UK. Those markets right now, their fuel prices are double or triple what South Africans are paying per litre. So if there is any empirical evidence that deregulated markets do not drive prices down, those are matured markets that have been deregulated for a long time. If what DA or anybody else is saying is true, then they need to tell us why are motorists in Germany marching in the streets today about high fuel prices. Why is that happening in UK? So we cannot base our arguments against empirical evidence. So coming to your other issues that you've touched on transformation and jobs, they are very key. If you go to the research on the UK market, on what deregulation did in that market, it wiped away about 40% of independent fuel retailers, and mainly it was in outlying areas. So in our environment, in rural areas. So if you go to UK today, in those outlying areas, motorists have to drive distances just to get a litre of fuel. And that was as a result of deregulation. So we have to be careful what we're asking for. And the issue of retailers having to compete, it ain't going to happen. Because right now, the retailer's got 2 elements of the entire pump price build-up. Is the OPEX, which is only 1 rand 33 cents a litre. And that OPEX, which is supposed to cover all the expenses, is under recovering by at least 12 cents a litre. So retailers can't even operate optimally with the current R1.33 a litre. And secondly, the last element, which is the profit margin, that's only 31 cents a litre before it even gets clawed back by all companies through various franchise agreements. So the question is, if you say that retailers will have to compete with what?
Right.
Because if they then give away the whole 133 cents a litre, they might as well close shop.
Yeah.
Now, and the issue of jobs. Okay, Thabo, maybe
let's bring in Kevin here. Kevin, a number of issues there to address. One is, of course, this question of your call being a direct challenge to the already very slim margin of retailers, one. And you then also have this challenge of wiping out, especially small players in outer-lying parts of South Africa. I think even the Free Market Foundation has said in deregulation there will be casualties, and by and large probably small players will be the casualties of that kind of policy direction. And can South Africa afford that degree of unemployment? Is the market ready for deregulation?
So thank you very much, Thabo. And I've heard what Reggie said, and you know, to a certain extent, I do share some of his concerns. But I think we're looking at this in isolation. You know, the fuel price isn't made up of just retailers and wholesalers. You've got to go back right to the imported landed cost of fuel. And if you can import cheaper fuel, you should be allowed to do so. So if I can bring it in cheaper than the price that is currently set by government, why shouldn't I do that? And then I can pass that saving on all the way down the value chain, through the wholesaler, through the retailer, to the consumer. I think it's distorting the whole concept of what we're putting on the table here, to say that fuel retailers, of all the businesses in South Africa, should be special in some way, that they are guaranteed a profit margin. That is a ridiculous proposal. It's absolutely ridiculous. I want to stress a couple of things here. South Africa is one of the outliers in the world in terms of being one of the very few countries that has a centralized, determined price for fuel. About 80% of the countries around the world have a free market system where the price is determined by the supply and demand in the market. There's a small percentage of 10 or 12% that is centrally determined, and then there's another small percent, similar kind of figure, where they set a ceiling for pricing. But the vast majority of countries use a completely free market system. So I think that's the first issue. The second is about job losses and the like. One of the things that we are not proposing in this bill is to take away any requirement or obligation that pump attendants be retained. In other words, the prohibition that is currently in the Act against self-service retail stations, that remains. We're not proposing to remove that at all. I hear the concern about outlying areas and smaller retailers. You know, if you have a free market system and you're in an outlying area, you would expect to pay a little bit more for the product because you're distributing it to a rural area. And if you're in an area where there is a large bulk and large volume distribution, you'd expect to pay a little bit less. And so this allows for that. It allows the remote retailer to charge a little bit more and recoup his costs that way.
Yeah.
But it does also put pressure on everybody to make sure that their prices are competitive. Now, one of the things that has been raised as a concern is that there's going to be price gouging, price manipulation, monopolistic practices, etc., etc. I want to stress that we've inserted a clause that we're proposing that this bill will insert into the Act, and that clause specifically obligates the minister to monitor fuel prices, and where he becomes aware of any price manipulation or anti-competitive behavior or the like, he is obligated within 30 days of becoming aware of that to report it to the Competition Commission for remedial action. So we've put all of that in place.
Layton, let's bring you in here. Deregulation, will it fix the entire fuel price structure, as you suggest, needs a revisit? Others argue this, Layton. They say it won't immediately put money actually in the pockets of the consumers. The other argument is that regulation is good in a sense that it offers transparency to road users because we know the price is published for everyone to see. All the components are there for everyone to see what it is. And if we deregulate, we're going to lose that in a sense. But also, there's a whole lot of question around the lost infrastructure in refineries and whether or not we can, under deregulation, be able to smooth out all the fluctuations in international product prices and the rand-dollar exchange.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Thabo, I think you've covered a lot of ground in that. I mean, you know, we're not going to take a position that supports regulation or deregulation. I think at the end of the day, any position that is going to benefit consumers is a position that we would take. Now, the issue with the arguments around deregulation and regulation is that, various elements are brought into play in terms of job losses. And, even as Mr. Mileham says, they're not going to, or they have included a clause that says pump attendants should continue working. The fact is that if rural fueling stations close down, those pump attendants will lose their jobs, de facto. So, that may happen in any case. The issue for us is that the debate around regulation and deregulation is a step 10 times down the road to where we think this process should start. And that process should start with a complete review of the components of the fuel price. There is a suggestion that the basic fuel price does not reflect true import parity pricing, the price that you pay for the product to get to South Africa. You've raised issues around the refineries. Those issues are becoming more complicated as days go on. The force majeure by Sasol, I think, is a good example of that. So there are many issues around fuel pricing in South Africa. And in our view, you are not going to solve them simply by saying, let's regulate or deregulate. That may be something that comes further down the line. At the heart of all of this must be a determination whether the components of the fuel price that are currently there are A, still necessary and applicable and relevant for South Africa, and B, whether all of those components have been calculated correctly and that determination should be done through an audit. And in our view, that should be the starting point of where we go from here in terms of mitigating rising fuel costs. The debate around regulation and deregulation, we think, is something that can be held later on.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll tackle again some of those issues in this particular debate. Let's hear your views. Regulate or not to regulate? 072. Back with you tonight, John in Focus. Still with Kevin Mileham of the DA, Reggie Sibiya. He's with the retailers of fuel, as well as AA's spokesperson, Layton. And we are talking, amongst other issues, the effects of the deregulation of the fuel price in South Africa. But Sibiya, let's bring you back then. The idea that retailers can be the only ones guaranteed a profit seems to be a challenge for the DA. Like they say, it's a ridiculous proposition. The other question that we should be looking at certainly is this notion that, well, retailers will not have the option for self-service. I know you had raised that issue at some point. Well, they are saying they are not dealing with that particular part of the act, and they are leaving that as is. But then also another issue that I know that you're strongly opposed to is the question of maybe an option of a ceiling for pricing.
Thank you, Thabo. And really, to be honest, the DA is failing to answer our question. And the question simply is, we have markets that have been deregulated for a long time, and we can learn from those markets. And if we deregulate, we will not be different in terms of the dynamics of deregulation. So if all that he's saying is true, then why are the markets that have been deregulated long time ago have doubled or tripled the prices that the South African consumer is paying now? He's shying away from that question. And one thing that is common, by the way, between South Africa and those three countries that I've mentioned, Germany, UK and US, is that we are all net importers of fuel.
Yeah.
And when we deregulate, then the different dynamics starts to kick in.
Yeah.
And the first one is exactly what he mentioned in terms of the BFP. The BFP currently in South Africa is actually protecting most motorists in terms of prices not going to the levels where we see prices going in Germany and UK and US. It's exactly because we have some form of regulation, like quasi-regulation.
Yeah.
And if you speak to oil companies right now, they will tell you that if you look at this late levy mechanism, which works out the under-recoveries and over-recoveries, they actually will tell you that they are being owed over 15 billion rands. But because the department kept this late levy to about 6 billion in terms of, refunding the oil companies, that is a protection. If you take that away, we will be exactly where Germany and UK are. Yeah. And coming to the question of capping.
Before you come into capping, let me just jump in there. I, before coming into this conversation, looked at one of the studies that was conducted, for example, in Australia. And I must admit, it's the only one that I looked at, in 3 cities there, in Melbourne and I think 2 others. What they found was that deregulation in the wholesale of fuel price, and I suppose they are keeping the retail regulated, certainly showed that there were signs of fuel price decrease.
Well, you've got to look at also the timing of that short term. When deregulation comes, what tends to happen is that players in the market, especially at wholesale level, may actually get into that kind of, short-term competition. But with time, they then realize that, nobody's making money in this game. And then what happens is that you'll find that the small players, and unfortunately in South Africa, the small players are the new incoming black SMMEs. Then the small players will quickly be wiped out of the system. And then the big players will consolidate again, which is the big oil company.
Explain what because that is one of the arguments, I think earlier on, I think it was in 2019 or not, that Treasury raised, that one of the issues that would be affected is that the market is already dominated by, I think, 6 main players who are controlling the petrol sold in the country. And if you want wholesalers to compete on price, the playing field currently is not leveled.
Absolutely. That's perfectly correct. And if you look currently at the white paper on energy and the Petroleum Products Act and the milestones that were set, they are very clear. The people that crafted that legislation and that policy paper, the milestones were that you first deal with the issue of transformation, get the industry transformed across the value chain. And then once you've got that, then you can start looking at the issue of pricing. And what we are doing now is the other way around. While the industry is still way below transformation, we are on a transition to transform. Yeah. We've got black entrepreneurs coming into the space, and they are highly geared. They've got high loans to pay. They certainly cannot compete on price. If you deregulate the market, those small players will be wiped out by the oil majors.
All right.
And the oil majors, yeah.
Let's get Kevin to answer that on that question of transformation. Kevin, that question, and also a question that the retailers are still pressing for, that why are we seeing marches everywhere in the world, including in Germany, where the fuel price is deregulated?
Look, I think the starting point has to be that you've got high fuel prices everywhere in the world. That's undeniable. That no matter which country you're in, fuel prices right now are at their highest that they've been in a long time. Whether they are comparatively high is a different question. Whether Germany is comparatively higher than South Africa or the United Kingdom, or the US. I was just taking a look at the US retail price of fuel. It's about $1.22 per litre, whereas South Africa is $1.54 per litre. Interestingly enough, our next door neighbor Botswana is at $1.09 a litre, which is quite a big drop in comparison to South Africa, considering that they get their fuel through the exact same ports from the exact same people that South Africa does. Now, I'm not saying that fuel price deregulation is going to give us exactly 9 rand a litre less, not by one second, or for 1 second am I saying that. I'm saying that a combination of factors will lead to that kind of drop. So we're looking, as you indicated earlier, at scrapping the general fuel levy. We've described this as a tax that's hard to avoid and easy to administer. It's a tax that nobody who buys petrol can get away from. And it's a tax that funds corruption and waste. So we believe that government needs to cut their cloth to fit. They need to be a bit more frugal. They need to find savings in their budget and scrap that general fuel levy to put more money in consumers' pockets. That's the first thing. The second thing that we're proposing is amending the road accident fund levy to allow road users who have a valid third-party insurance to claim a tax rebate of up to R2.18 per litre, the amount that they spend on the road accident fund levy, to claim that back when they submit their tax returns. And then to deregulate the whole fuel sector. And again, I want to stress here, this is not targeted at the retailers. It's targeted at the entire fuel price. And this is where I agree with Layton. We've got to look at how that fuel price is calculated. You can't look at only one little section of it, and that being the retailer margin, and say, oh, we mustn't do it because the retailer margins are going to be squeezed. We've got to look at the entire fuel price. If we can import fuel significantly cheaper than we currently are at a set price, then let's do it. Let's do it and pass that saving on to consumers. And that's the big issue here, is that it's about that entire value chain of bringing fuel in. I just want to pick up on something that you touched on earlier, and that is our refining capacity in South Africa. You know, we've got 4 refineries that are capable of refining crude oil into petroleum products, and all 4 of them are shut down at the moment. 3 of them pretty much permanently, and 1 of them because of force majeure, Sasol, who have had a delay in the shipment of crude oil. But essentially, every bit of fuel that we produce or that we use in South Africa right now is being imported, refined. And so we can look around and say, where can we import refined fuel cheaper than what we currently are? How do we bring it in at a cost that suits our consumers in South Africa? And if we take away those taxes, we can get up to 9 rand a litre off that price. And that price will go along all the way down the line. So even if the oil price drops in 6 months' time, as Reggie is suggesting, the saving will continue to add on to that. So it'll be over and above that decrease in the fuel price. We'll see a continued saving.
We'll come back to Reggie Sibiya. I see he's shaking his head. He's not in agreement with you there. Layton, we'll give you a moment when we come back from the break. Right, we continue in a moment here in this debate on the deregulation of the fuel price. Layton Beard still with us. We've got Kevin Mileham of the Democratic Alliance and Reggie Sibiya of the Fuel Retailers Association of South Africa. The poet and writer and giant of literature, that is Don Matera, being laid to rest. As you see there in those pictures, under the Muslim rights, the procession continuing towards the cemetery now. And those are some of the live pictures of Don Matera being laid to rest. And we will, of course, bring an update on that as we continue tonight. In Focus, continue the debate on the deregulation of the fuel price and other aspects proposed, put on the table by the Democratic Alliance, including the slashing of the basic fuel levy and the amendment of the road accident fund. Still with us, Kevin Mileham, Reggie, Sibiya, as well as Layton. Layton, let me come to you. Scrapping of levies, others say yes, may reduce the fuel price in the short term, but I get a sense that from Godongwa and the government will still have to collect the revenue through other means. Now, will consumers be happier with raising taxes, for example, in VAT and personal income tax? Because he says, I think the 90 billion to the fiscus will have to be found somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, we've got two issues here. We've got the general fuel levy, which is currently pegged at R3.93, and the road accident fund levy at R2.18, which is why the DA said you get a rebate of R2.18 on every litre of fuel if you've got third-party insurance. Look, I mean, the general fuel levy is, as Mr. Mileham did indicate, a very easy tax to collect. And everybody pays it. It's a very equal type of tax in that every person who commutes across the country and uses any form of transport or who buys anything is going to, in some shape or form, going to pay that tax. Obviously the concern is that if you take that R3.93 out of the mix, government is going to want to get it somewhere. Governments across the world are loath to part with that amount of money, especially when it's as easy as this to collect. So when you're talking about 90 billion rand, government will look for other avenues to continue this revenue stream. They may increase existing taxes or they may introduce new taxes. The bottom line is that some way you are going to pay that amount of money, and it may not be directly to fuel. It may be, as you said, in the form of increased VAT. It may be in the form of increased company tax or personal tax, or there may be a new tax that's introduced. So is that really sorting the problem out? And in our view, it isn't. And it's exactly why we feel and we concur with those who say that the issue of corruption and graft and the allocation of money is so key and central to dealing better with the fuel price in South Africa, because it's issues like this that are actually the result of all of that at the end of the day. The more misallocation and misappropriation and graft there is, the more that money that you pay towards fuel is going to be misspent, and the more unhappiness there's going to be. So that's obviously for us a very big concern, and I'll bring you back to the whole let's review the fuel price issue. The second issue of the road accident fund is a very interesting issue, and I think something that is very concerning to the AA is why nobody is talking about why we need the RAF in the first place. Why do we as a country have such an over-reliance on the road accident fund, which is in effect there to compensate victims of crashes? And the reason we have to have a system like that is because we have one of the worst road safety records in the world. We have one of the highest per capita death rates in the world. And we're not dealing with that root cause of why the RAF is needed. We're not saying scrap the RAF. We're just posing the question of why do we have such a reliance on the RAF? Now, you have to consider that in the context that the lead agency responsible for road safety in South Africa, the Road Traffic Management Corporation, had in 2020 a surplus of 262 million rand in its budget. Now, if you consider that, and the RTMC's own admission that if you were to reduce crashes, you would save the country in the region of 190 billion rand a year, that's where the conversation needs to go. So yes, we can have theoretical discussions about how people can claim back, RAF, and they can get a rebate if they've got insurance. And I mean, let's have that debate. But the bigger question is, why do we have such an over-reliance on the RAF in the first place? Yeah. On the issue of the general fuel levy, what checks and balances are there to ensure that the money that is collected through that fund is actually appropriated correctly and spent correctly, not in our view, 60 billion rand on something like SAA. So, it's not an issue that is a one tick box solution type thing. It requires a lot of in-depth discussion, and it needs everybody in the industry to be involved in that discussion. While we obviously welcome, inputs from anybody in terms of what they think can mitigate against rising fuel costs, we've got to deal with the root issues. Otherwise, the problems we have with rising fuel costs are going to persist in perpetuity.
We are, of course, having two important conversations, all happening at the same time. If you're seeing the pictures there currently on your screen, are showing pictures of what is happening at the burial of activists, poets and literature icon Don Matera. Some Muslim rites being performed currently on that body, which has now arrived at the cemetery in West Park. That's the West Park Cemetery there. And those are the imams who are conducting the ceremony and some of those processes that are going to be undertaken there. As you see, the Muslim community laying to rest the body of Don Matera.
Please, brothers, please have a seat for a little while. Please. And those who want to sit on the grass, you may do so also. But the program is going to take place here at the back. Please, brothers, slightly towards me. No, it's fine. Are you sure?
Yeah, you can. Give it to me.
I don't know, you tell me.
So what is it?
Right, looks like some more processes would still need to be undertaken. The Imam, they're asking some of the mourners to be seated maybe on the ground while they undertake those processes before the program continues. Ahmed Kaji is on the ground for us. We will go to him in just a moment to get the latest update. Back to our conversation tonight. We are with the DA, the AA, as well as the Fuel Retailers Association of South Africa. And we are talking the question of fuel and the deregulation and other processes that need to be undertaken. But Sibiya, I'm sure you've had this, and maybe people have come to you as well, to say, why is the fuel that we're getting from Natref, which is Sasol fuel, also as expensive as the final products that we are getting from outside of the country? Of course, government's answer to that is that in a regulated environment, you can't have a number of prices in place. So you have to have one price. But there is a sense that if we improve our refining capacity, we could possibly be getting price at fuel at a more competitive price.
Thanks, Thabo. Firstly, let me just correct the perception. I mean, if you go again to those deregulated markets I've mentioned, they're using both, locally refined and finished imported product. So that's not a new trend. In fact, more and more, they are actually getting finished product at those high prices. So the notion that a finished product is cheaper is actually not backed by any factual evidence, and it's not true. And coming to your question, of course, we're using, import parity pricing system. And we also have to be mindful that, locally, we can only produce 30% of fuel from syn fuels. So it means then 70% of the price, of the demand, has to come from imports. And then, obviously that becomes for a regulator a very complicated, system to manage. How do you base your pricing for 70% of the demand using 30%? Of course, you've got to use the highest, demand point, which is the import pricing point. So that is the reason why the system is used like that. And also, Thabo, just coming again to the issue of retailers. We're not saying that retailers should be treated, especially. All we're saying is that all these proposals, when they've been issued out, they have clearly stated that let's deregulate so that retailers can compete amongst each other. That's even the statement from the DA, to say retailers must compete amongst each other. So that is the position, of course, we are defending.
Yeah.
And also just to throw something in this discussion, in June, we had our conference, and we had invited speakers from UK and US who are very experienced in the area of fuel retailing and convenience retailing. And we were discussing this issue of deregulation because it's been, in the air for quite some time. And, they were saying, guys, there is also the ugly side of deregulation. And there is also the positive side. But the positive side is not, the positive side for the motorists. They say, for example, during COVID, we lost, massive volumes, just like you guys did during lockdowns. But guess what? Our retailers in UK and US, they had to double or triple up their margins to make up for the loss. Now think about that. Our government protected the motorist from that kind of onslaught because the economics say that if you lose volumes, you must increase your price.
Right.
That's just a basic economic situation. So we must be careful what we're asking for. And lastly, Thabo, on this issue, diesel in South Africa has been regulated for a long time. Deregulated completely. So why are we not seeing diesel prices cheaper? DA must answer that. Why are we not? So we are already deregulated on diesel for a long time.
Well, the argument is that from forecourt to forecourt, you would not be paying the same price, and there is certainly probably a little bit of saving that you will find depending on where you prefer to fill up.
But with due respect, that differential, Thabo, is not even greater than 3 cents or 5 cents at most.
I'm sorry, I disagree completely. There's a differential in some places of up to R2.50 a litre on diesel, from retailer to retailer. There are places where diesel is discounted up to R2.50 lower than the average diesel price.
Yeah.
And this is what we're saying. It's not just about competition amongst retailers. It's about competition amongst wholesalers. It's about competition at the import price of fuel. We can't just say, we mustn't have competition. I want to back up a step, because one of the things that Reggie hasn't touched on is that the deregulation of fuel is actually government policy. It's in the 1998 White Paper on Energy, and it just hasn't been implemented. Now, perhaps Reggie can answer why it hasn't been implemented. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you the answer. It's because organizations like the Fuel Retailers Association want their guaranteed profit margins. They want to say, we're going to guarantee that every fuel retailer is going to get 25 or 30 cents a litre for profit. That's part of the problem. Compete. Be competitive. Fight it out. Like every other business in the country. Why should you be special?
I have answered that question, Kevin. I don't think you were listening. So when I started, I quoted the white paper, if you were listening. I even said that the white paper on energy had clearly defined milestones. And deregulation was the last part of, if you go and read it carefully and analyze it, it's got milestones. So transformation is supposed to come before deregulation. Go and read it.
I've read it. I know it very well. I know it very well. And one of those
So I did mention it.
We have canvassed this question of transformation, and it has been raised certainly by Treasury that the sector would need to transform and be ready for deregulation. But here's the other issue that could be arguing against the regulation, that the regulation currently is an ineffective instrument in terms of constraining the pricing behavior of the oil majors, but two, it imposes increased production costs on the retailers.
No, to the contrary, regulation actually protects motorists. Let's be clear. Regulation protects the motorists. And that's why government, when they regulate, there are three pillars that they need to look at. Firstly is the consumer prices. Then secondly is the security of supply. And we haven't touched that in this discussion.
Yes.
The security of supply, which can become a major issue if people are actually taken out of the market because of unfair competition. And then the third issue is then the socio-economic issues.
Right.
So in our view, regulation actually, like the example I was using in UK and US during COVID-19, where retailers there actually doubled and tripled their margins.
Right.
Our government here could not even give us 10 cents a litre tabo. We were begging on our knees.
Unfortunately, because of time, I'm going to leave the conversation there. But I take you on, Layton, on the conversation around the road accident fund, and I think we need yourself, we need the Transport Department to come on, and let's have that debate. So we'll bring you back, and we will explore that a little bit further. Let me thank you, gentlemen, for coming on this evening. Big thanks to Reggie Sibiya, as well as Kevin Mileham, and AA's Layton Beard. We continue on In Focus.